23,000 pounds of ground beef, pulled from grocery distribution channels in February 2026. The reason? Inspectors had detected E. coli O145 in beef connected to an Idaho processing facility. And that wasn't the only incident. Just weeks earlier, another brand built around the words grass-fed and trusted had faced its own E. coli recall. And months before that, beef sold under the label of one of America's most respected organic grocery brands had already reached stores nationwide before the problem was discovered. 3 companies, 3 separate incidents, all within 12 months. But here's where this story gets much bigger. Federal investigators were also examining whether the 4 companies responsible for roughly 85% of America's beef processing had coordinated to restrict supply and keep prices high. So we chose 10 recognizable ground beef brands and started digging. Not at the front of the package, behind it. Because 2 packages sitting side by side in the same supermarket cooler can look almost identical. But their stories can be completely different. And sometimes, the company behind the package isn't the company you think you're buying from. We looked at USDA recall records, federal filings, company statements, independent testing and reporting, and ownership records. What we found wasn't simply a list of good and bad brands. It was something more complicated. Some companies make their supply chains remarkably easy to investigate. Others reveal almost nothing beyond what federal law requires. And as we moved down this list, the questions became increasingly difficult to ignore. So let's start at number 10. Number 10. Bubba Burger. Bubba Burger has spent decades building its reputation around simplicity. Its original patty contains one ingredient, USDA Choice Beef Chuck. The packaging and public labeling support that claim. No fillers, no preservatives, no additives. But there's an important distinction most shoppers never think about. Ground beef, beef patties, and burgers aren't necessarily the same legal category. Ground beef, under USDA rules, can't contain ingredients beyond the meat itself. Formed patties can operate under different rules, allowing additional ingredients as long as they're properly declared. So Bubba Burger's original isn't the problem. The lesson is the label itself. The words on the front tell you what the company wants you to notice. The ingredient panel tells you what you're actually buying. And that's a distinction we're going to keep coming back to. Number 9. Good and Gather private label beef has become a major part of the American grocery cart. Target's Good and Gather is a perfect example. Clean packaging, simple branding, competitive prices. But we weren't asking whether it was safe. We were asking a different question. Who actually processes the meat? Good and Gather beef is supplied through contracted processing partners rather than a facility Target operates itself. And Target provides relatively little public information about those supplier relationships. That isn't evidence the beef is unsafe. USDA inspectors apply the same federal inspection system to it as other meat, but safety and transparency aren't the same thing. If a company tells you where its beef comes from, who processes it, and how it's tested, you can investigate those claims. If it doesn't, you're left with trust. And trust is much harder to verify. Number 8. Members Mark. Members Mark sells one of the most powerful promises in retail. More for less. Bigger packages. Lower prices. But because it's a private label, identical packages aren't necessarily processed at one dedicated facility. Depending on region, season, and supplier contracts, the same label can come from different plants. That's not automatically a red flag, but it makes one tiny detail on the package surprisingly important. The USDA establishment number. That little number identifies the facility where the meat was processed. Most shoppers never look at it. But when a recall happens, that number can tell you whether the package in your freezer actually came from the affected plant. So Members Mark isn't here because we found evidence that it's unsafe. It's here because the path from processing facility to shopping cart can be harder to trace than the price tag suggests. If you're learning something from this investigation, subscribe to this channel, like this video, share it with someone who does the grocery shopping in your family, and tell me in the comments which ground beef brand you currently buy. We're only at number 8, and the ownership story behind the next brand is something many shoppers probably never see coming. Number 7. Niman Ranch. Niman Ranch built its identity around independent family ranching. The imagery is powerful. Small farms, independent ranchers, traditional production, but follow the ownership trail, and you find something different. Since 2015, Niman Ranch has been owned by Purdue Farms, one of America's largest meat companies. The acquisition wasn't hidden, it was publicly announced, but it's not necessarily the first thing that comes to mind when shoppers see the Niman Ranch name. Does that make the beef worse? The evidence doesn't support that conclusion. Niman Ranch still works with more than 700 independent family farmers and ranchers. It maintains its no antibiotics and no added hormones standards, and it carries certified humane status backed by third-party auditing. So the issue isn't necessarily that the marketing is false, it's that the picture is incomplete. A company can maintain meaningful farming standards while operating inside the infrastructure of a massive meat corporation, and that matters when you're trying to understand what your money is actually supporting. Number 6. Great value. Great value takes us from individual brands to the structure of the entire American beef industry. Walmart sells an enormous amount of ground beef, and historically, much of that supply has depended heavily on major processors including Tyson and Cargill. Why does that matter? Because 4 companies, Tyson, Cargill, JBS, and National Beef, process roughly 85% of America's beef. In May 2026, the Department of Justice confirmed a criminal antitrust investigation examining whether those companies coordinated to restrict supply and keep prices artificially high. Tyson and Cargill also agreed to pay a combined $87.5 million to settle related consumer claims, without admitting wrongdoing. Meanwhile, litigation involving JBS and National Beef continued. None of this means great value beef is inherently unsafe. It reveals something much bigger. The brand name printed on the package may represent only a small part of the supply chain behind it, and Walmart has begun trying to change that dependency by expanding its own beef processing capacity. But the industry remains highly concentrated, and that brings us to our first actual contamination case. Number 5. Fire River Farms. This is the recall that opened our investigation. On February 11, 2026, USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service announced a recall involving approximately 22,912 pounds of raw ground beef connected to Fire River Farms and CS beef packers. Routine testing detected E. coli 0145. But here's the detail that matters. The contamination was detected through testing, not because consumers became sick. The affected beef came from a specific production run and was shipped to distributors in California, Idaho, and Oregon for restaurant and food service use. And the USDA establishment number helped investigators trace the product back to a specific processing facility. That's exactly what the system is supposed to do: find the problem, identify the source, stop the product. But our next case shows why timing matters so much. Number 4. Forward Farms Grass-Fed. Forward Farms built its identity around a premium promise: grass-fed. But in December 2025, FSIS announced a recall involving approximately 2,855 pounds of Forward Farms grass-fed ground beef after routine testing detected E. coli 02T6. The beef had already been shipped to distributors across 6 states for retail sale. Again, no illnesses were confirmed. And there's an important distinction here. The recall wasn't evidence that the grass-fed claim itself was false. How cattle are raised, and what happens to the meat during processing are two completely different questions. Grass-fed, artisan, farm to table. These words can describe how the animal was raised. They don't tell you what happened inside the processing plant afterward, and that distinction becomes even more important with number 3. If this is making you look at the meat in your own refrigerator differently, subscribe to this channel, like this video, share it with the person who buys groceries for your household, and comment below, have you ever checked the USDA establishment number on your meat? Because the next case involves beef that had already reached consumers before the problem was discovered. Number 3. Organic Rancher. Organic Rancher is sold exclusively at Whole Foods, and its identity is built around powerful claims. USDA certified organic, 100% grass-fed and grass-finished. Pasture-raised, lifetime traceability. But in June 2025, FSIS issued a public health alert involving Organic Rancher beef contaminated with E. coli 0157H7. And there's an important difference between a recall and a public health alert. A recall means product is still available to be pulled. A public health alert can mean there's nothing left to pull. The affected beef had already been sold at Whole Foods locations across at least 26 states and Washington, D.C. According to the processor, pathogen testing on the batch had been delayed. The meat reached stores before the results confirming E. coli came back. The company notified Whole Foods and USDA once the results were known, and remaining product was removed. No illnesses were confirmed. But the bigger lesson is uncomfortable. No certification eliminates the gap between when meat is processed and when its safety is actually confirmed. Organic certification tells you something about production. It doesn't guarantee that a processing or testing failure can never happen. Number 2. JBS. You may never see JBS printed on your package, but you may have eaten JBS beef without knowing it. JBS is the U.S. subsidiary of the world's largest meat processor. It supplies a huge share of America's beef through grocery brands, private labels, restaurants, and food service distributors. And its scale has created some extraordinary vulnerabilities. In 2021, a ransomware attack forced JBS facilities across multiple countries to shut down for days. The company ultimately paid $11 million in Bitcoin to regain control of its systems. The incident demonstrated how the disruption of one company could threaten meat supplies across multiple countries. JBS is also one of the 4 companies named in the DOJ's active criminal antitrust investigation, and it remains involved in litigation surrounding allegations of beef price manipulation. But here's the part consumers should remember. You don't have to see the JBS name on a package for JBS to be somewhere in the supply chain. Number 1. Tyson Foods. Tyson isn't here because of one recall, or one investigation, or one controversy. It's here because nearly every major issue we've examined intersects with its supply chain. Tyson is one of America's largest food companies. It supplies grocery chains, restaurants, and private label brands. That includes a significant share of products sold through Walmart under labels such as Great Value. Tyson is also one of the 4 companies involved in the federal antitrust investigation into America's beef processing industry. It and Cargill agreed to the combined $87.5 million settlement of consumer price-fixing claims without admitting wrongdoing. But the concerns don't stop there. Investigations beginning in 2023 found migrant children working overnight cleaning shifts at Tyson facilities through third-party sanitation contractors. Federal investigations continued examining the company's responsibility for those contractors, and later allegations involving underage workers. Tyson has maintained a zero-tolerance policy for underage employment and has said the violations involved third-party contractors, but investigators have continued examining the company's responsibility, and that's why Tyson sits at number 1, because several separate threads converge here. Industry concentration, supply chain opacity, a federal price-fixing investigation, labor controversies, and enormous influence over products that don't even carry the Tyson name. You may never buy a package labeled Tyson. That doesn't mean Tyson's beef hasn't reached your shopping cart. We've now reached the #1 spot, but don't leave yet. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and tell me in the comments which revelation surprised you most. The investigation isn't actually over. We found something else. And what we found is 5 brands that stood out for transparency. After examining the brands that raised the biggest questions, we looked for companies doing something different. Not companies claiming to be perfect. Companies willing to make their claims easier to verify. Number 1. Thousand Hills Lifetime Grazed. Its producers are independently certified by organizations including the American Grass-Fed Association and Audubon Conservation Ranching. The company also publishes the regional ranches supplying its beef, and much of the beef is processed through its own small-batch Minnesota facility. That doesn't prove perfection, but it gives outsiders something valuable, something they can actually check. Number 2. Force of Nature Meats. Force of Nature carries a Global Animal Partnership Step 4 rating. Its beef suppliers are publicly identified across several states, and its animal raising practices are subject to ongoing third-party auditing. Again, the difference is verification, not simply a claim printed on the package. Number 3. Costco Kirkland Signature. Costco isn't perfect. Its beef supply chain has faced legitimate questions involving animal welfare and environmental impact, but Costco publishes sustainability information, including sourcing details and policies concerning deforestation. That documentation matters, because transparency doesn't mean having a spotless record. It means giving people enough information to examine the record. Number 4. Global Animal Partnership. The Global Animal Partnership 5-step program provides an independent animal welfare framework tracking how animals are raised. But remember, animal welfare and food safety are different questions. A program can tell you how an animal was raised. It cannot eliminate every possible food processing or pathogen testing failure. That's why consumers need to understand exactly what a certification actually covers. Number 5. Niman Ranch, revisited earlier. We questioned the limited visibility around Niman Ranch's ownership by Purdue. That criticism still matters, but so do the company's independently verifiable standards. More than 700 independent family farmers, no antibiotics ever standards, certified humane status, third-party verification, corporate ownership and genuine animal welfare standards can exist at the same time. The important thing is knowing both sides. If you appreciate investigations that show both sides of the story, subscribe to this channel, like this video, share it with someone who cares about what their family eats, and comment below with the next everyday product you want us to investigate. Because the goal here is to make sure you're asking better questions before you buy it. The real lesson. After 10 brands, 5 transparency examples, multiple recalls, and an industry dominated by a surprisingly small number of processors, what actually separates the companies at the top from the companies at the bottom? It isn't always price. It isn't the reassuring name on the package, and it isn't whether a company has ever experienced a problem. The biggest difference is much simpler. Can someone outside the company's marketing department verify what the company is saying? Can you identify the source? Can you identify the processor? Can you understand what a certification actually covers? Can an independent organization audit the claim? Can you trace a package back to a facility if something goes wrong? Because the lesson here isn't that you should be afraid of ground beef. It's that you should become harder to impress with a label. Grass-fed tells you something. Organic tells you something. Family-owned tells you something. But none of those words tells you the entire story. The next time you're standing in the meat aisle, don't just compare the price. Look at the ingredient panel. Look for the USDA establishment number. Understand the certifications, and pay attention to what the company is willing to show you beyond the marketing, because transparency isn't proof of perfection, but it gives consumers something much more valuable than a reassuring label. It gives you the ability to ask questions and verify the answers. If this investigation changed the way you look at the ground beef in your refrigerator, subscribe to this channel, like this video, share it with someone who does the grocery shopping in your family, and leave a comment telling us what everyday product we should investigate next. Your suggestion could become our next documentary, because sometimes the most important story isn't the one printed on the package, it's the one hiding behind it. And now you know where to look.